It is all beloved Baba's grace. For all the viewers from India, Iran, the USA, England, Australia, my Jai Baba to all of you for participating in this wonderful initiative by MeherSepas. You see me seated in front of the Darshan room at Beloved Archives, which is in Hamilton, New Jersey in the United States. Behind me is this beautiful photograph of Meher Baba taken at Devonshire Retreat in 1932. And on the either side of this photograph, you see two chairs. And Baba sat on those chairs in 1950 and 1953 when he came to a small town in the foothills of the Himalayas called Dehradun. It is a full archive of Baba's artifacts, letters, videos, and anyone doing research on the life, work, and teachings of Meher Baba are welcome to come here. It's next to Princeton. This archive is next to Princeton. So this is just a little intro of where we are at the moment and where we are talking from, where we are sharing from. So to begin this afternoon's program, I'd like to go back to the foothills of the Himalayas, to a small hamlet called Dehradun. So I was 2 months old when Meher Baba came to my home in Dehradun and carried me around from room to room for several hours. My father had already met him, and my mother met him also at the same time. And at that very moment, the way Baba lovingly carried me from room to room, lovingly held me in his arms, and on the lap of his love. And many years later, I wrote a book called In Lap of Love, which was a collection of poems that I had dedicated to Meher Baba, and Meher Baba had sent me a message for this book. But as a small child, I had to go through an excruciating experience. My parents by this time had completely dedicated themselves to Meher Baba and were willing to obey everything that he asked of. So what happened was that as a baby, I developed a severe life-threatening rash all over my body. Several doctors were consulted, and naturally my parents were very concerned, and Gohar was consulted. So Gohar finally mentioned it to Meher Baba because Meher Baba was traveling continually in that area contacting musts. So Baba was told about this little baby Naosherwan who was suffering from this severe scabies-like ailment. And Baba came to our house and told my mother, "Will you obey me if I ask you to do something?" And my mother said, "Yes, Baba." Baba would always, when he instructed something that was a little difficult, he would say it 3 times. So he asked my father and mother again, "Will you do what I ask you to do?" And they said, "Yes, Baba." And again, a 3rd time, Baba said, "Will you absolutely obey what I ask you to do?" And they said, "Yes, Baba." So Baba said, "Take the baby, scrub the baby all over its body with a brush, and then all the things that the body has touched, and including the blankets or the covering and even the quilt had to be burnt completely, and put the baby to sleep." And my mother did what Baba asked her to do. And my father would come every few minutes and put his hand on my mouth to see if I was breathing. And by Baba's grace and my parents' obedience to him, I'm here today to narrate this story. Now, this is my father, my mother, and it's a picture of me. When Baba came in 1950 during the new life, my father and my mother worked tirelessly, particularly my father, in traveling with Baba throughout, contacting musts and so forth. So this picture was taken at that time. It's my father and my mother, and we were dressed up on Navroz Day. It was Navroz, and we celebrated the Navroz with MEHERBABA. This picture is of Baba's house. Baba came to live across the house from us, and this photograph was taken of me at the front of Baba's house. Baba was on the inside, along with the women Mandli, and on that day we celebrated Navroz. And with his own hands, Baba gave each one of us rava. Rava is a Parsi delicacy, sweet delicacy that is made on special occasions. Baba enjoyed it himself, and he gave to each one of us with his own hands, and celebrated Navroz, the New Year. And this photograph was taken at that time. So Baba came in 1950 during the new life. And then again in 1953, when MEHERBABA came to Dehradun, he stayed for close to a year. And in November of that year, he went back to Meherabad. But I came closest to him in that year, in 1953. And we had several meetings, and I was there when MEHERBABA on September 7, 1953, gave out one of his most important messages, the highest of the high in Dehradun. And I was present at that time, at that meeting, at that darshan program. So I came very close to him. We had several meetings. He came to our house several times, and I went to where he lived and so forth. So it became very difficult for me when MEHERBABA left for Meherabad in November of 1953. I don't know how others felt, but I was absolutely distraught. Yes, of course, it's not the time for me to tell you how this message came about, perhaps another time, but every single message or discourse that Baba gave always had a genesis. They had a reason for Baba to give that message, as was the message highest of the high. But in any case, after Baba left Dehradun in 53, all I wanted to do was to be with him. And my life as a seeker went through a tremendous metamorphosis. I did not want to study. I did not want to do anything. I became a little must-like. My parents were very concerned. All I wanted to do was to be with Baba. And one day, I surreptitiously bought tickets to go to Ahmednagar, and so things came to a head when my mother wrote to Baba explaining him the state of my mind and the state of my being. And Baba sent me several messages asking to obey him. But I was in such a state of mind that all I wanted to do was to disobey him, and did not want to listen to what he said. All I wanted to do was to be with him. And I kept telling him that I would be coming. In fact, next slide. So this slide shows me dressed up as Vivekananda. And I saw myself as Naosherwan to MEHERBABA, as Vivekananda saw to Ramakrishna. This was in 1964. So a point came in my shenanigans, and Baba couldn't take it anymore, I guess, when he slammed me with a ton of bricks and stopped me in my tracks. He sent me a cable, renounce nothing but your present attitude. And then he told me in no uncertain terms, for spiritual aspirants, Renunciation is of help, but those who love the avatar are under his direct guidance do not have to renounce anything. The lovers of the avatar have simply to obey the avatar's instructions and to love him wholeheartedly. During this time, I saw a small news item in the newspapers about the Third World Religions Conference. And I was encouraged to go for this conference. I was just in my teens at that time. And this was a huge, a massive affair. And there were other Baba speakers at this conference. I spoke under the subject of world peace. So to cut the story short, it's a fairly long story about my attending this conference with hundreds and hundreds of people in this huge place called Ramlila Grounds in New Delhi, where the Prime Minister was presiding. It was headed by Muni Sushil Kumar and Sant Kirpal Singh, these two spiritual masters. So when my turn came to speak, I stood on the stage. I had never spoken in front of 20 people, and here I was speaking in front of hundreds of people. And I had prepared my 45-minute speech, which was the time they had given me. And I started by Zarathustra's message on world peace, Ram's message on world peace, Krishna's message on world peace, Muhammad's message on world peace, Buddha's message on world peace, Christ's message on world peace. And then I introduced MEHERBABA's message on world peace. As I uttered MEHERBABA's name, two people on either side of me physically assaulted me and asked me to sit down. So at that moment, I called out to the huge audience and I said, would you like me to sit down or would you like me to continue speaking about MEHERBABA's message? And the crowd shouted in unison, we want MEHERBABA, we want MEHERBABA. And I continued speaking about Baba. So when you do Baba's work, in whatever arena you are in, you will always find great difficulties and a lot of situations which are contrary to what you expect. At the Third World Religions Conference, and I'm standing on the extreme left. On the same visit to New Delhi, I was also invited to address a group of Zoroastrians, and the head priest of the Zoroastrians was presiding at this meeting. And they asked me to give my impressions of my visit to the conference. And the moment I mentioned MEHERBABA's name, the head priest staged a walkout. During the bulk of MEHERBABA's ministry in the early years, particularly in the 30s, the Zoroastrians were terribly against MEHERBABA's advent and about his declaration of being the same ancient one. And there were people like Colonel M.S. Irani and a whole bunch of others who wrote against MEHERBABA. So after this experience, I wrote to Baba a very long letter explaining to him all that happened in New Delhi. But Baba was not satisfied with my written letter. He invited me to come to Pune, and I met him on March 5th, 1965. I sat in MEHERBABA's presence and narrated to him everything. But I wanted to say something very significant that changed my life at this meeting. This meeting was perhaps the most significant meeting of my life in MEHERBABA's presence. So Baba, in the course of conversation, he asked me, Irish, his interpreter, his secretary, had written to me saying, don't ask any questions of Baba. But I, being a journalist, was very anxious to ask him questions. So I got an opening where I said that, Baba, by your grace, I was able to answer all the questions that people asked me except one. And Baba said, what was that question? So I said, Baba, they said, how can MEHERBABA say that he's God in human form? And Baba kind of heaved a sigh of relief that what a simple question. And then he turned serious and he said, Naosherwan, you are God. Each of my companions here are God. I am God, but I am conscious of my divinity. My work is to make all of you conscious of your divinity. And how do I do that? I give you the gift of conviction. And it is this gift of conviction that has steered me all my life to love MEHERBABA and to serve him. And then he said something that I have never ever heard him say to anyone else. He then said to me, I was sitting at his feet, he was sitting on a chair. Then he put his hand out at me, and I expected that he expected my hand to be stretched to him. We both held hands, and he said, I want you to tell the world that I am God in human form. He gave me this mandate at that time. And he gave me this mandate and sealed it with this medallion that you see over here in my hand. I hope all of you can see it. It's got MEHERBABA's image on the front and Mastery in Servitude and all the emblems at the back. I worked in a book for which I have been collecting diaries and memoirs of those who witnessed MEHERBABA's boyhood as Merwan. MEHERBABA dropped his body on January 31, 1969. While his body lay in state in the tomb atop Meherabad Hill, I clutched his feet in the crypt and pledged to write his biography. Consequently, I was invited by his close disciples to Meherzad to collect details of his life, work, and teachings. The two disciples who guided me in writing the biography of the avatar were his sister Mani Irani and his chief male disciples, Erit Jasawala. Each day they shared unpublished material, diaries, notes, letters, manuscripts written by Baba's early disciples, most of them unpublished. When I wrote his biography, The Beloved, this is The Beloved, which is the life and work of MEHERBABA. It was published in 1974 and has gone into 8 printings. But after I completed this book and it was widely distributed, I felt very strongly that a vital piece of MEHERBABA's life was missing: his early years as Merwan, the name given to him by his parents at birth. During my stay in Meherzad, I resolved that I would research Merwan's boyhood and detail how he came to be accepted the world over as the avatar, as God in human form. So at Meherzad, Mani and Ali Akbar Shapur Zaman, whose nickname was Aloba, many of you have met him, known him. He was an alumnus of the Hazrat Babajan School, which was established by MEHERBABA for boys in 1927. And he was a former resident of Yazd in Persia. Of course, all of you know this, but just for the young ones today who may not know, that Persia was the official name of Iran before March 1935. But in the mid-1930s, its ruler Reza Shah Pahlavi formalized the name Iran. So, and one of MEHERBABA's close disciples counseled me, he was one of MEHERBABA's close disciples living in the Mandli, that if I were to research the life and times of Shehryar Mondegar Irani, MEHERBABA's father, I must visit Iran. I decided that I would travel to this ancient land and gather details on Baba's Zoroastrian family, and later walk through the lanes and by-lanes of his birthplace, Pune, where he was known as Merwan. Many of you are aware that Farhad Shafa traveled around Iran and extensively interviewed the boys of both the MEHER Ashram and the Prem Ashram. A short while back, he wrote a short introduction to the establishment of how the boys traveled from Iran to Meherabad in 1927-28, and were a part of the Hazrat Babajan school. So for those who may not know this, I'll read a short introduction written by Farhad for the Glow International. So Farhad writes that in February of 1924, Baba decided to test the waters, as it were, for his journeys to the West by first taking a sea voyage to Iran. Storms, torrential rain, and severe illness of the Mandli, even of Baba himself, made it impossible for him to spend more than a few days in the Iranian port cities on the Persian Gulf. However, Baba seems to have been able to lay the groundwork for his future work, which included drawing boys from Iran to join his school of love a few years later. On the way back from this voyage, Baba left Baidul, one of his close companions, in Iran, and asked him to go to his native village of Jafrabad, near Yazd. A few years later, Baba asked Baidul to start a free school for boys in his home, in Baidul's home. It was from this school, funded by Daulat Mai, who was Mera Irani's mother. Mera Irani was MEHERBABA's chief woman disciple, that a group of 14 boys joined Baba's school in India on July 17, 1927. So this group included 12 Zoroastrian boys from Baidul's village of Jafrabad and nearby villages, and 2 Muslim boys. The fact that 2 of the boys were Muslim was no doubt a key factor of the Islamic Mughal community in Bombay to send their children, their boys, to the Hazrat Babajan school. In addition to these 14 boys, there was a 15th one. He was a staunch Muslim from the same shores of the Persian Gulf that Baba had stepped on. He had read about Baba's school in India in a newspaper, and he decided to join it for the free education it provided. He arrived on July 9, 1927, with the sole intent of getting an education. However, as it turned out, he became the most spiritually transformed of all the boys. His name was Abdullah Pakravan. According to Baba, he was raised to the 6th plane of consciousness, and Baba named him Chota Baba, or Little Baba. Finally, there was an older Zoroastrian boy, Shehryar Mehrabanpur, who traveled to Meherabad on his own. The other boys who Farhad met and interviewed, besides Abdullah, were Shehryar Mehrabanpur, Khushru Nami Iranian Tus, and Asfandyar Risali. And I'm sure Farhad interviewed several others that I don't know of. So in 1976, my mother Franny and I traveled to Tehran. From Meherabad International Airport, we drove to the village of Kashanak and entered the home of Asfandyar and Shireen Risali, our hosts during our stay in northern Iran. So their house was located just outside the ramparts of the Nalavala Imperial Palace. The picture that you see here is of the Nalavala Imperial Palace. So this is a picture of Asfandyar on the right, standing there, and his wife Shireen, and a friend of theirs. So Asfandyar had also been a student in the Hazrat Babajan school and had returned to Iran under instructions from Baba. We met his 3 sons, Iraj, Faridun, and Parvez. Asfandyar told us about an unfortunate incident of arsenic poisoning that had impacted the family. His wife Shireen had lost twin babies she was carrying, but the most tragic was what happened to his youngest son, Parvez. He suffered severe brain injury.
I just want to mention the lady that you see sitting there, her name is Khorshid Mai, and
Yes.
she's a close relative of MEHERBABA's mother, Shireen, and
Okay.
Ustad Khaderam's wife.
So we are familiar with the genocide in Germany against the Jews, against the Armenians in Turkey, in the Spanish colonies in several countries. What has not been narrated is the suffering of the Zoroastrians during the Qajar dynasty in Persia. So here is a picture of a Zoroastrian family during the Qajar dynasty in Iran, in Persia. While Asfandyar gave us a glimpse of how the Zoroastrians were persecuted at that time, as we traveled around Tehran, we learned of the genocide against this ancient religion that eventually forced MEHERBABA's family to migrate to India. And while it was an unfortunate period for Zoroastrians at that time, there were several different events that happened that turned things around. So Mani Irani sent me a copy of her memoirs in 1962, and I also had the memoirs of MEHERBABA's earliest companion, in fact, his sole companion in 1922 at the Jhopri in Pune, Beli Irani. His boyhood companion and diaries of his early disciples formed the backbone of my narration. So Mani's memoirs were strictly focused on her interviews with her father and her grandmother and some of the Iranis who lived in Persia at that time and had then migrated to Pune. So that's the bulk. The first half of the book is focused on that and what happened to the Iranis who eventually, Zoroastrians who migrated. So her memoirs give us an insight into the fact that the influx of Iranis migrating from Persia to India about the time her grandparents came was chiefly because of the heavy-handedness of the rulers of Iran. So one of the areas we hope to investigate in Iran was the plight of the Zoroastrians who lived in Persia in those very uncertain times. So we arrived at Meherabad International Airport, which serves Tehran in Iran. Today, I believe it's not serving foreign carriers anymore. We noted that it had no steeples or domes, yet it had a strange aura of religious fervor. We saw women covered in burqas, and most of the men were walking around praying with rosaries. In Tehran, we met Zoroastrians and followers of MEHERBABA. In Shiraz, we visited the tomb of the poets Hafiz and Sheikh Sadi. And when you see, when you have a copy of the book, you'll see that we discovered the original tomb of Hafiz. The one that you see now, Hafiz's tomb, is a newly constructed one. New in the sense that it was constructed many years back, but the old one is a beautiful mausoleum of Hafiz. And then we also visited the tomb of Sheikh Sadi. I noticed that many Iranians are not familiar with Sheikh Sadi, but he was a great poet. And in Khorramshahr, in Yazd, we met Shams. He was an attorney. His father had been a friend of Shahryar's family. He had a photographic memory and gave us a vivid account of those difficult times. As we walked through the towns of Khorramshahr and Jafrabad, we witnessed the extent to which the Zoroastrians suffered. Most of the houses we visited in Khorramshahr were low and dug below the level of the road. The houses had to be built low so that outsiders could reach the opening of a Zoroastrian home and enter it at will. Now, I'll just narrate one incident that Mani's father told her about one of the fellow Iranis in Persia. So Mani writes, I particularly remember, and I'll read the whole thing, I'll narrate the whole thing. I particularly remember the story of my father would relate about his Irani friend who one day reached the end of his limit of restraint with dramatic results. It was a custom laid down by the rulers that when an Irani, meaning a Zoroastrian, accosted one of them, no matter his age, he should salute and bow down to him. And if the Irani were riding a horse or a donkey, he had to dismount to offer obeisance. One day, this man that my father knew was out on his little horse, when on the way he met a young boy. The boy stood in the path, gripping the horse's bridle. He commanded the Irani man to dismount and salute him. This was the last straw. And as the man dismounted, he looked around and saw the place was quite deserted. His control completely snapped. He put a hand over the boy's mouth, picked him up bodily, carried him to the well, and threw him in. Then he quickly mounted his animal, and it seems he took the next ship to Bombay with the help of fellow Iranis. So this was an incident that, among the many incidents that are in the book, Mani mentions this one. So a short distance away, equidistant from Khurramshah and Jafrabad, is a place called Qasimabad. And that's where there were two towers of silence. One was abandoned and one was an active one.
Here's your reminder.
So we were taken to see the Tower of Silence, where Shahryar's father had been what is known as a Nase Salar, or a caretaker. This picture is of the entrance to the Tower of Silence. So this is the one that was abandoned. So I took this picture. We were very close to it. And the guide who took us there, he told us that, sir, you might not know, but there was a man called Shahryar. He figured that we had no clue about Shahryar. So he says there was a man called Shahryar who used to look after the Tower of Silence. And one day he just left everything. He walked into the wilderness, and we never heard of him. He was a mystic and a seeker, but his sister, Piroja, continued to live in the town of Khurramshah. So along with our new friends, we walked on the same lane the previous one. The same lane that Baba had walked on, and reached the house we were looking for. So this photograph that I took was so reminiscent of biblical times that I took this picture of Jafrabad, which was completely abandoned by the villagers. There was no one living there. These three people who lived there would get water every alternate week, and they continued to live in this village. I don't know what the state is, but Aloba, before I left India, had told me that when you go to Baidul's house, you will see a row of photographs of Baba all around, and this was what he told me. But when we walked to his house, it had completely broken down. The roof had caved in. The house was in complete shambles. The door was barred. There was debris all over, chunks on the floor. There was no roof. Part of the wall had collapsed, except for a part of it with Hazrat MEHERBABA scrawled in Farsi in white paint. That was the only indication of this house having some connection with MEHERBABA. Only somebody had scrawled on the wall, Hazrat MEHERBABA. So Hassan told us that before MEHERBABA had started the Hazrat Babajan school in Meherabad, he had a school for Persian boys, where Agha Baidul served as a teacher. And we found strewn under the rubble pieces of slate and chalk. So as I looked around for some indication of MEHERBABA's visit to the house, I saw a trap door half buried in chunks of plaster. I removed the sand, dug the trap door ajar, only to find an apparently empty, dingy niche filled with sand. I began to dig through the layers of sand when I discovered a stack of papers. You see me in front of that niche. I excitedly removed them and, much to my amazement, found photographs and letters that had been buried in the sand for 47 years, but were still in a state of perfect preservation. The photographs were of MEHERBABA in Quetta and with students of the Hazrat Babajan school. The letters read of MEHERBABA's visit to Iran in 1929, a letter dated August 9, 1929, written by Kaikashru Asfandyar, mentioned MEHERBABA's forthcoming visit to Iran, in which he says, "You may convey this happy news to the people and residents of Iran that His Holiness MEHERBABA will be arriving in Iran on the 1st of Nowruz." Now, the next story that I'm going to mention or narrate has never been heard or written, ever. And it appears for the first time in the book. So over several centuries, Zoroastrians increasingly suffered an assault on their religious beliefs. Many of them converted, but it is believed that a small group of Zoroastrians secretly saved the original books of the Prophet Zoroaster's teachings from being destroyed and hid them in caves, adhering to their Zoroastrian faith. They were known, these people were known amongst the Zoroastrians as Gufe Nashin, or cave dwellers. Gufe meaning cave, and Nashin means dwellers. It was on the way to the small village that his Mandli experienced, MEHERBABA's Mandli experienced a mysterious occurrence. The car suddenly developed mechanical failure, and MEHERBABA stepped out and walked a short distance into a field and waited as if expecting someone to come. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the disciples saw a tall man riding a horse come galloping in Baba's direction. The horseman stopped a short distance away, and the two men stared at each other for some time. MEHERBABA indicated that the man on the horse was a Zoroastrian Gufe Nashin. Baba said that his work was complete. The car inexplicably restarted, and they headed for Jafrabad. MEHERBABA's universal work was done in silence and unobtrusively. This picture is of Zoroastrians who gather every year in June to pray in this cave. And there are lots of caves in the Meyamand area where Zoroastrians still live. And they came to the conclusion that Zoroastrians lived in that area because they found a number of remains or ossuaries of Zoroastrians.
His question to you is that he wants you to talk about love, and his connection to Baba was through God Speaks, and that they're making audio Persian tapes right now. And he would like to get your reflection on that particular subject about Baba's love, how he speaks to each one of us.
Yes. So why are we all here? Why are 50 people over here, present over here? All of you are here because beloved Baba has awakened you to his love. and he has given you that gift of conviction that he talks about. And that's why each one of you are here. And each day that goes by, we awaken to his love, and we feel, and the way to feel his love each day in our lives is to feel his presence in our lives. So whatever difficulties we feel in our lives, whatever suffering we go through, it is his will, it is his wish, it is his will. And he awakens us to that experience that we need to go through because of our sanskars, our mental impressions that we've accumulated over several lifetimes. And as we go each day through each of these, whether it's good or bad, whether it's suffering or happiness, he helps us experience, he gives us that spiritual experience, that mystical experience of his presence in our lives. So this is an ongoing process, feeling his love in our lives, in our hearts. But what is most important, once we come to Baba, is to be of service to him as well. So while it is your right to come to MEHERBABA and bow down at his feet, it is your duty to share his love with others, with people whom you meet, wherever you meet. Share his love with them. Then the more you share his love with others, the more the love in your heart grows from day to day. That is my experience that I'm sharing with you.